The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of downtown Phoenix as Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind the rusted shell of an overturned delivery truck, his calloused hands gripping a modified crowbar that had become his most trusted companion over the past 18 months. The silence was deceptive. He knew better than to trust the quiet that had settled over the city like a suffocating blanket. Somewhere in the distance, the distinctive shuffle-drag sound of the infected echoed between the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving metropolis. Marcus pressed his back against the cool metal, feeling the familiar weight of his backpack filled with scavenged supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for his small group of survivors holed up in the fortified community college 15 miles north of the city center. The infection had spread faster than anyone could have predicted, turning ordinary people into mindless, aggressive creatures driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. What started as isolated incidents in major coastal cities had exploded into a global pandemic within weeks, overwhelming military responses and government containment efforts. Marcus remembered the last emergency broadcast, the president's voice crackling through static as he announced the implementation of martial law moments before the transmission cut to dead air forever. That was over a year ago, and since then, the survivors had learned to adapt to a world where the rules of civilization no longer applied, where every decision carried life or death consequences, and where trust was a luxury few could afford. As Marcus peered around the edge of the truck, scanning the debris-strewn intersection for any signs of movement, he spotted what he had been searching for, the entrance to Miller's Pharmacy, its metal security gate partially torn away but still providing access to the medical supplies his group desperately needed. Emma Watson, their makeshift medic and former nursing student, had been treating Jacob Thompson's infected leg wound with their dwindling antibiotic supply, and without proper medication, gangrene would set in within days. The pharmacy represented hope, but it also represented danger, as these resource-rich locations were frequently contested territory between survivor groups and often served as hunting grounds for the infected who were drawn to the scent of previous human activity. The plan was simple in theory but dangerous in execution. Marcus would create a distraction on the east side of the building while his partner, Derek Sullivan, approached from the west to secure the medications. Derek was a former army mechanic whose steady nerves and tactical thinking had saved their group countless times, but even his military training couldn't completely eliminate the risks they faced in the urban wasteland. They had spent 3 days observing the area, noting the patrol patterns of both the infected and a rival survivor group led by a ruthless man named Vincent Kane, whose people had been systematically raiding smaller communities and forcing them into servitude or worse. Marcus checked his watch, a solar-powered device he had liberated from an abandoned sporting goods store, and realized Derek should be in position within the next 2 minutes. The timing had to be perfect because the infected, despite their degraded mental state, had developed an uncanny ability to coordinate their movements when alerted to potential prey. Recent encounters had shown that the creatures were evolving, becoming more cunning and strategic in their hunting behavior, leading some survivors to theorize that the infection was adapting to human defensive tactics. This evolutionary development had made survival exponentially more difficult and had forced communities to constantly innovate their security measures and survival strategies. A distant crash from the direction of Kane's territory made Marcus freeze, his muscles tensing as he strained to identify the source of the disturbance. Kane's group had been expanding their influence throughout the region, using a combination of superior firepower and ruthless tactics to absorb smaller survivor communities. Unlike Marcus's group, which operated on principles of mutual aid and democratic decision-making, Kane's faction ruled through fear and intimidation, treating weaker survivors as expendable resources. The philosophical divide between these approaches had created an inevitable conflict that was brewing beneath the surface of the daily struggle for survival, threatening to explode into open warfare that could determine the future direction of human civilization in the post-apocalyptic world. The sound of approaching footsteps, the deliberate, measured pace of a living human rather than the irregular shuffle of the infected, made Marcus grip his crowbar tighter as he prepared for potential confrontation. Through a gap in the truck's damaged frame, he caught sight of a figure moving with practiced stealth along the opposite side of the street, someone who clearly knew how to navigate the dangers of the infected zone. The person wore military-style clothing and carried what appeared to be a high-quality rifle, suggesting they were either a member of Kane's well-equipped forces or possibly a survivor from one of the rumored government safe zones that were supposedly still operational in remote locations. Either possibility presented complications for Marcus's mission, as any additional human presence in the area would increase the likelihood of attracting unwanted attention from both the infected and rival survivor groups, turning an already dangerous supply run into a potentially lethal three-way confrontation that could have far-reaching consequences for his community's survival. The mysterious figure suddenly stopped and raised their rifle, aiming directly at Marcus's position, forcing him to duck lower behind the truck as his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Through the twisted metal, he could see the person's face more clearly now, a woman with short auburn hair and sharp, calculating eyes that swept the area with military precision. She wore a tactical vest adorned with patches Marcus didn't recognize, and her movements suggested extensive combat training that went far beyond basic survival skills. What concerned him most was that she seemed to know exactly where he was hiding, indicating either exceptional tracking abilities or prior surveillance of his movements. Marcus slowly reached for the handheld radio clipped to his belt, keeping his movements minimal as he attempted to warn Derek about the unexpected complication, but before he could key the transmitter, the woman's voice cut through the morning air with surprising clarity and authority. "Marcus Rodriguez, I know you're behind that truck, and I know Derek Sullivan is approximately 60 meters to the west preparing to breach Miller's pharmacy," she called out, her tone neither threatening nor friendly, but carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, and I represent what remains of the Federal Emergency Response Coordination Center. We've been monitoring your group's activities for the past 3 weeks, and we have a proposition that could change everything for your community and possibly for the future of organized human resistance against the infected." Her words sent a chill down Marcus's spine because they implied a level of surveillance capability that he had assumed was impossible in the post-apocalyptic landscape, suggesting that somewhere in the chaos, governmental or military structures had survived and were operating with resources far beyond what civilian survivor groups possessed. Marcus remained silent, weighing his options as his mind raced through the implications of this unexpected contact. If Hayes was telling the truth about representing federal authorities, it could mean access to resources, medical supplies, and strategic coordination that could transform their struggling community into something more sustainable. However, his experiences over the past 18 months had taught him that trust was often a fatal mistake, and anyone claiming governmental authority in the current world could easily be a sophisticated con artist working for Kane's faction or another predatory group seeking to exploit vulnerable survivors. The timing was also suspicious, coinciding perfectly with their most critical supply mission, which suggested either remarkable coincidence or careful planning based on detailed intelligence gathering. "I understand your hesitation, Marcus," Hayes continued, lowering her rifle but maintaining her alert posture as she scanned the surrounding buildings for signs of infected activity. "The last 18 months have taught everyone to be skeptical of outside contact, but the situation is evolving faster than most civilian groups realize. The infected are not just becoming more coordinated, they're developing hierarchical structures, and we've documented evidence of problem-solving capabilities that suggest the pathogen is fundamentally altering human neural pathways rather than simply destroying them. Within 6 months, possibly sooner, the infected will pose an entirely different category of threat, one that will make current survival strategies obsolete and require coordinated military response to prevent complete human extinction." As if summoned by her words, a low moaning sound began to echo from the direction of the shopping district, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple footsteps moving in unison across broken pavement. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water as he realized the infected had detected their presence, probably drawn by Hayes's voice or possibly by some other factor they hadn't anticipated. The approaching sound suggested a large group, potentially dozens of infected moving together in the coordinated fashion that Hayes had just described, transforming their controlled supply mission into a potential death trap that could eliminate both his team and this mysterious military representative in a matter of minutes. "Derek, abort mission and move to Extraction Point Charlie," Marcus whispered urgently into his radio, using the predetermined code that would direct his partner to their fallback rally point 3 blocks north of their current location. He could hear the tension in his own voice as the infected sounds grew closer, and he knew that within moments they would need to make critical decisions about whether to trust Hayes, attempt to evade the approaching horde, or potentially fight their way through dozens of infected creatures with limited ammunition and improvised weapons. Hayes apparently heard his radio transmission because she immediately began moving toward his position with practiced efficiency, her rifle ready but pointed away from Marcus in a gesture that seemed designed to indicate non-hostile intent. "We need to move together if we want to survive the next 10 minutes, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death command decisions. "There's a secure facility 12 miles north of here where we can continue this conversation without worrying about infected interference, but first we need to extract your partner and get clear of this area before the hunting pack reaches our position." The distinctive sound of Derek's voice crackled through Marcus's radio, tense but controlled as years of military discipline took over despite the escalating danger. "Marcus, I've got visual on approximately 15 infected moving in formation from the east, and they're definitely hunting rather than wandering. These aren't the shambling corpses we dealt with 6 months ago, they're moving with purpose and seem to be communicating through some kind of vocal pattern I've never heard before." The revelation sent a chill through Marcus because it confirmed Hayes' warnings about the infected's evolutionary development, suggesting that their current survival strategies might indeed be becoming obsolete faster than anyone had anticipated. Derek's voice continued with increasing urgency, "I'm also seeing evidence of tool use. One of them is carrying what looks like a modified piece of rebar, and another has fashioned some kind of crude weapon from scavenged materials." Hayes immediately keyed her own military-grade radio, speaking in rapid, precise terminology that indicated extensive coordination capabilities. "Alpha Base, this is Raven 6 requesting immediate extraction support at coordinates 37.4 north, 112.1 west. We have civilians in contact with an evolved hunting pack, estimated 15 to 20 hostiles displaying advanced behavioral patterns. Request drone surveillance of escape routes Charlie through Echo and possible artillery support if situation deteriorates." The casual mention of drone surveillance and artillery support made Marcus realize that Hayes' claims about federal resources might be legitimate, as such capabilities would be extremely difficult to fake or maintain without substantial governmental infrastructure. Marcus made the split-second decision to trust Hayes, at least temporarily, as the alternative of facing the approaching infected alone would likely result in death for both him and Derek. "Hayes, if you're legitimate, then you know our extraction protocols. Derek will be moving to Point Charlie in 90 seconds, but he'll need covering fire to break contact with the infected pack that's closing on his position." He checked his ammunition count, 12 rounds in his modified hunting rifle and 1 spare magazine, knowing that conventional firearms were effective against individual infected but nearly useless against the coordinated group tactics they were apparently now employing. The sound of breaking glass echoed from Derek's direction, followed by several sharp bangs that Marcus recognized as improvised explosive devices Derek had crafted from household chemicals and scavenged materials. These homemade weapons had proven effective at creating confusion and temporary barriers, but their limited supply meant Derek was already committing significant resources to escape his current predicament. Hayes responded by moving with remarkable speed toward Derek's last known position, her rifle held in a low-ready stance that suggested extensive combat experience in urban environments. "Derek, this is Hayes. Marcus can confirm my identity later, but right now I need you to move north-northwest toward the old bus depot while I provide suppressive fire from your 6 o'clock position," she transmitted with the calm authority of someone accustomed to coordinating combat operations under extreme pressure. "I have backup en route, but we need to maintain mobility for the next 8 minutes until extraction assets can reach our location." Marcus found himself impressed by her tactical assessment and communication clarity, though he remained wary of the implications of her apparent resources and surveillance capabilities. A new sound cut through the urban landscape, the distinctive whine of electric motors that Marcus initially thought might be infected using power tools, until he realized the noise was coming from above. Hayes had apparently called in drone support, and the mechanical buzzing suggested advanced surveillance and possibly weapons platforms that could provide real-time intelligence about infected movements and concentrations. The technological gap between Hayes' resources and typical survivor equipment was staggering, raising questions about what other governmental or military assets might have survived the initial collapse and why they had remained hidden from civilian survivor communities. Derek's voice returned to the radio with notable relief. "I've got eyes on both of you, and I can see the infected pack has split into two groups attempting some kind of flanking maneuver. Hayes, I don't know who you are, but that suppressive fire bought me the time I needed to reach better cover. Marcus, these things are definitely operating with tactical awareness. They're using buildings for concealment and coordinating their movements in ways that suggest planning rather than just instinctive behavior." The confirmation of advanced infected tactics from a trained military observer made the situation even more ominous, as it suggested the pathogen was not simply destroying human intelligence but potentially redirecting it toward predatory efficiency. Hayes gestured for Marcus to follow her as she began moving toward Derek's position with practiced urban warfare techniques, using building corners and vehicle debris for cover while maintaining visual contact with potential threats. "The facility I mentioned has research data that explains what's happening to the infected, and more importantly, it has resources that could help civilian communities adapt their defensive strategies before the next evolutionary phase begins," she explained while maintaining constant surveillance of their surroundings. "But first we need to survive the next few minutes and get your team to safety, because this hunting pack represents just a small sample of what survivor communities will be facing within the next few months if current trends continue." The extraction point turned out to be a carefully concealed military staging area that Marcus would never have suspected existed, hidden beneath what appeared to be an abandoned auto repair shop but was actually an elaborate camouflaged entrance to an underground facility that extended far deeper than seemed possible. Hayes led them through a series of security checkpoints that included biometric scanners, electromagnetic field detectors, and what appeared to be some kind of pathogen screening system that bathed them in ultraviolet light before allowing passage to the main operations center. The technological sophistication was overwhelming for survivors who had become accustomed to improvised solutions and scavenged equipment, suggesting that significant governmental resources had indeed survived the initial collapse and had been quietly rebuilding infrastructure while civilian communities struggled with basic survival. Derek maintained his military bearing despite the obvious amazement at the facility's capabilities, but Marcus could see his partner's tactical mind processing the strategic implications of what they were witnessing. "Colonel Hayes, this level of operational security and technological capability suggests substantial personnel and resource allocation," Derek observed, his training allowing him to quickly assess the military significance of their surroundings. "How many federal installations like this are currently operational, and why hasn't this information been shared with civilian survivor communities who could benefit from coordination and mutual support?" His questions were pointed but respectful, reflecting the natural skepticism of someone who had learned to question everything in a world where deception often meant the difference between life and death. Hayes paused at a reinforced glass door that required both palm print verification and retinal scanning, turning to face both men with an expression that combined professional authority with genuine concern. "What I'm about to show you represents classified information that could fundamentally change how humanity approaches the infected crisis, but it also carries responsibilities that most civilian communities aren't equipped to handle," she explained, her voice taking on a more serious tone than they had heard during the escape from the hunting pack. "There are currently 7 facilities like this operational across North America, coordinating research, resource allocation, and strategic planning for long-term human survival, but public knowledge of our existence would create massive security vulnerabilities and potentially trigger widespread panic that could undermine our mission." The blast door opened to reveal a bustling command center that looked like something from a science fiction movie, with multiple large displays showing real-time satellite imagery, infected population density maps, and communication networks connecting survivor communities across the continent. Dozens of personnel in military uniforms and civilian clothing worked at advanced computer stations, coordinating what appeared to be a massive intelligence gathering and support operation that dwarfed anything Marcus had imagined possible in the post-apocalyptic landscape. The scope of the operation suggested that the federal government had not only survived the initial collapse but had been actively working to rebuild civilization from secure locations while allowing surface communities to believe they were completely on their own. A tall man with graying hair and colonel's insignia approached their group, extending his hand in greeting while his sharp eyes assessed the 2 civilian survivors with obvious professional interest. "I'm Colonel Benjamin Wright, operations commander for this sector's coordination efforts, he introduced himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to managing complex military operations under extreme pressure. Colonel Hayes has briefed me on your community's situation and capabilities, and we believe your group represents exactly the kind of organized, principled survivor network that could serve as a foundation for expanded resistance operations against the evolved infected threat. His words suggested that their visit was not coincidental but part of a larger strategic assessment that had been ongoing for some time. Wright led them to a briefing room where wall-mounted displays showed detailed analysis of infected behavioral patterns, evolutionary timelines, and projected threat assessments that painted a disturbing picture of humanity's future prospects. The pathogen responsible for the infection is not destroying human intelligence as we initially believed, but rather redirecting and enhancing specific cognitive functions while eliminating others, Wright explained, pointing to brain scan comparisons that showed dramatic neural restructuring in infected individuals. The infected are developing collective intelligence capabilities, tool-making skills, and strategic planning abilities that will make them exponentially more dangerous within the next 6 to 12 months, requiring coordinated military response that individual survivor communities cannot possibly manage alone. Marcus studied the data with growing alarm, realizing that the random attacks and chaotic behavior they had learned to expect from the infected were evolving into something far more systematic and threatening. Colonel Wright, if this intelligence is accurate, then every survivor community is operating under false assumptions about the nature of the threat they're facing, Marcus said, his voice reflecting the gravity of the implications. The defensive strategies that have kept us alive for the past 18 months will become completely inadequate against opponents who can plan, coordinate, and adapt their tactics based on our behavior. The revelation transformed his understanding of their situation from a struggle against mindless predators to a war against an evolving enemy that might eventually surpass human capabilities in specific areas. Derek leaned forward to examine detailed photographs showing infected individuals using complex tools and apparently communicating through sophisticated gestural languages that suggested rapid cultural development within infected communities. Sir, these images indicate that the infected are not just evolving individually but are developing social structures and knowledge-sharing systems that could accelerate their advancement exponentially, Derek observed, his military training helping him grasp the strategic implications faster than most civilian observers would. If they're capable of this level of organization and learning, then traditional containment and elimination strategies will become ineffective, and we'll need to approach this as asymmetric warfare against an adaptive opponent rather than a cleanup operation against damaged humans. Wright activated another display that showed real-time footage from various survivor settlements across the region, including several that Marcus recognized from radio communications and trading networks his community had established over the past year. The images were disturbing. Infected groups systematically probing defenses at multiple locations, testing response times and identifying weaknesses with patience and strategic thinking that defied everything survivors thought they knew about the creatures. At one settlement, the infected had apparently spent days observing guard rotations before launching a precisely timed assault that overwhelmed defenses through coordinated attacks at vulnerable points during shift changes. The tactical sophistication was undeniable and terrifying, suggesting that traditional defensive measures were becoming obsolete faster than communities could adapt. The settlement you're seeing was Riverside Community, population 43 survivors who had successfully defended their position for over 14 months, Wright explained, his voice carrying the weight of delivering devastating news to people who might recognize faces among the victims. The infected spent 6 days conducting reconnaissance before executing a multi-phase assault that neutralized perimeter defenses, eliminated communication capabilities, and systematically captured rather than killed the human defenders. The emphasis on capture rather than killing sent a chill through Marcus because it suggested the infected had developed strategic objectives beyond simple feeding behavior, implying long-term planning that could indicate even more advanced cognitive development than the military had initially documented. Hayes pulled up additional intelligence reports that showed similar patterns across dozens of survivor communities, with infected groups demonstrating increasingly sophisticated tactics including the use of psychological warfare, coordinated disinformation campaigns, and what appeared to be deliberate efforts to sow discord between allied survivor settlements. We've documented cases where infected individuals have successfully infiltrated survivor communities by mimicking human behavior patterns well enough to pass initial screening, gathering intelligence about defenses and resources before facilitating coordinated attacks from within, she reported, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask the horror of these revelations. The pathogen appears to be preserving memory and learning capabilities while redirecting them toward predatory efficiency, creating opponents who understand human psychology and can exploit our social structures against us. Derek's expression had grown increasingly grim as he absorbed the implications of the intelligence briefing, his military training allowing him to quickly extrapolate the strategic consequences of facing such adaptive opponents. "Colonel, if the infected can successfully impersonate humans and infiltrate our communities, then traditional security protocols become meaningless, and we'll need completely new approaches to verify identity and maintain operational security," Derek said, his voice reflecting the overwhelming nature of the challenge they were facing. "How do we distinguish between genuine human survivors and infected infiltrators, especially when dealing with refugees or new community members who claim to be fleeing from compromised settlements?" The question highlighted one of the most disturbing aspects of the evolving threat, the possibility that trust itself could become a fatal vulnerability. Before Wright could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the facility, accompanied by flashing red lights and automated announcements directing all personnel to immediate readiness positions. A young communications officer approached their group at a run, her face pale with obvious urgency as she delivered a report that would change everything they thought they understood about their situation. "Sir, we're receiving distress signals from Marcus Rodriguez's home community at the college campus, along with reports that Vincent Kane's forces have initiated a major offensive against multiple survivor settlements in the northern sector," she reported breathlessly. "Kane appears to be coordinating with infected groups, using them as advanced scouts and assault forces while his human fighters exploit the chaos to seize territory and resources." The revelation that Kane had somehow managed to coordinate with the infected represented a nightmare scenario that combined the worst aspects of human brutality with the evolving capabilities of the infected threat. Marcus felt his world shifting as he realized his friends and fellow survivors were under attack while he was learning about threats they couldn't possibly understand or defend against effectively. "Colonel Wright, my people don't know anything about infected infiltration tactics or coordinated assault strategies," Marcus said urgently, his protective instincts overriding any concerns about military protocol or security classifications. "Emma Watson, Jacob Thompson, and 37 other people are depending on defensive strategies that assume the infected are mindless predators, and if Kane is using them as tactical assets, then my community is walking into a slaughter they can't possibly anticipate or prevent." Wright immediately began issuing orders to his staff, transforming the briefing room into an active command center as personnel scrambled to coordinate emergency response operations. "Hayes, prepare extraction teams Alpha and Bravo for immediate deployment to the college campus, and coordinate with our embedded assets in Kane's organization to assess his operational capabilities and strategic objectives," Wright commanded with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing multiple crisis situations simultaneously. "Rodriguez, Sullivan, you're going back to your community, but this time you'll have support assets and real-time intelligence coordination that should give your people a fighting chance against both Kane's forces and any infected assets he might be deploying." The prospect of returning to defend his community filled Marcus with both relief and terror, as he realized they would be walking into a combat situation that combined everything they had learned about the evolving infected threat with the immediate danger posed by Kane's ruthless human forces. Hayes began outlining tactical support options that included communication equipment, advanced weapons, and coordination with military assets that could provide covering fire and intelligence updates, but Marcus knew that even with federal support, the upcoming battle would determine whether organized human communities could survive in a world where the rules of engagement were changing faster than anyone could adapt. The stakes had escalated beyond simple survival to encompass the future of human civilization itself, and the choices made in the next few hours could determine whether humanity would maintain any hope of recovering from the apocalyptic collapse. The preparation for their return mission moved with military efficiency that Marcus had never experienced, as specialized equipment and tactical gear appeared seemingly from nowhere while Hayes coordinated with multiple support teams through encrypted communications channels. Within 30 minutes, Marcus and Derek found themselves equipped with advanced body armor, military-grade weapons, and communication equipment that would allow real-time coordination with federal assets during the approaching battle. The transformation from desperate scavengers to supported tactical operatives was both empowering and overwhelming, representing access to resources that could fundamentally change the balance of power between survivor communities and their various threats. Wright personally briefed them on the tactical support they could expect, including drone surveillance, artillery coordination, and emergency extraction capabilities that would be standing by throughout their mission. The most crucial piece of equipment turned out to be a portable device that Hayes described as an infected detection scanner, using biomagnetic field analysis to distinguish between normal human neural patterns and the altered brain activity characteristic of infected individuals. This technology is still experimental, but field testing has shown 93% accuracy in identifying infected infiltrators, even when they're successfully mimicking human behavior patterns, Hayes explained while demonstrating the device's operation through a series of diagnostic tests. The scanner can detect the neural restructuring that occurs during infection, providing early warning about potential infiltrators before they can compromise community security or gather intelligence for coordinated attacks. The device represented a potential game-changer for survivor communities, offering the first reliable method for maintaining security against the most insidious aspect of the evolved infected threat. Derek tested the communication equipment while Marcus familiarized himself with the advanced rifle they had provided, a weapon that featured integrated targeting systems and specialized ammunition designed specifically for maximum effectiveness against infected targets. The ammunition incorporated experimental compounds that would disrupt the neural pathways responsible for the infected's enhanced coordination and problem-solving abilities, potentially reverting them temporarily to the mindless state that survivors had originally learned to combat. Wright emphasized that these resources were being provided on an experimental basis, representing federal investment in determining whether civilian communities could be effectively supported and integrated into broader strategic operations against the evolving threat. As they prepared to depart, a communications officer approached with urgent updates from the college campus that made Marcus's blood run cold with the realization that they might already be too late to prevent catastrophe. "Sir, we're receiving fragmentary transmissions from the college indicating that Kane's forces have initiated siege operations using infected as shock troops while his human fighters establish perimeter control," the officer reported with professional detachment that couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. "Our embedded assets report that Kane has somehow developed methods for directing infected behavior, possibly through pheromone manipulation or neural interface technology that allows limited control over their tactical movements." The possibility that Kane had achieved some form of infected control represented a nightmare scenario that could render traditional defensive strategies completely obsolete. Hayes led them to an armored vehicle that would transport them to within 3 miles of the college campus, close enough to provide tactical support but far enough to avoid detection by Kane's scouts or infected surveillance assets. During the drive, she provided additional intelligence about Kane's organization that revealed a level of sophistication and resources that explained how he had managed to expand his territorial control so rapidly. "Kane's not just another survivor warlord. Our intelligence suggests he's a former military contractor with extensive experience in asymmetric warfare and population control operations," Hayes explained while monitoring real-time updates from the developing situation. "He's been systematically recruiting former military and law enforcement personnel, building an organization that combines professional tactical capabilities with complete disregard for civilian casualties or ethical constraints." The vehicle's communication systems crackled with updates from the college campus as Emma Watson's voice cut through static with desperate urgency that made Marcus grip his weapon tighter in helpless frustration. "This is Emma Watson at the college medical facility, requesting immediate assistance from any available forces. We have hostile human combatants coordinating with infected units in what appears to be a systematic assault on our perimeter defenses," Emma transmitted with the controlled panic of someone trying to maintain professional composure during a life-threatening crisis. "Jacob Thompson has organized our defensive positions, but we're facing tactics we've never encountered before, and our conventional countermeasures are proving inadequate against coordinated infected assault teams supported by human sniper fire and explosive devices." Derek immediately responded through their military communication system, his training allowing him to provide tactical guidance despite the distance and chaos of the developing battle. Emma, this is Derek Sullivan with Federal Tactical Support. Maintain defensive positions and avoid engagement with infected units that appear to be acting with unusual coordination, Derek transmitted while Wright's command center began coordinating artillery support and drone surveillance assets. We have advanced countermeasures en route and should reach your position within 20 minutes, but until then, focus on surviving rather than winning, and trust that help is coming with capabilities specifically designed to address the evolved threats you're facing. Marcus stared through the vehicle's armored windows at the landscape rushing past, knowing that every minute of delay could mean the difference between saving his community and arriving to find nothing but devastation and loss that would haunt him forever. The approaching battle would test everything they had learned about the evolved infected threat while determining whether federal support could actually tip the balance in favor of organized human resistance against the forces that threatened to eliminate civilization entirely. The armored vehicle crested the final hill overlooking the college campus just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across what had become a war zone that bore little resemblance to the peaceful educational institution Marcus remembered from before the collapse. Smoke billowed from multiple buildings while the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed across the grounds, punctuated by the more disturbing sounds of coordinated infected vocalizations that seemed to carry tactical information between different assault groups. Through the vehicle's enhanced optics, Marcus could see Kane's human fighters positioned strategically around the campus perimeter, using suppressive fire to pin down defenders while infected units moved with frightening precision toward weak points in the college's hastily constructed fortifications. Hayes immediately began coordinating with overhead drone assets that provided real-time battlefield intelligence, revealing the true scope of Kane's tactical sophistication and the unprecedented level of infected coordination they were witnessing. Marcus, your people have done better than expected, but they're facing a three-pronged assault that combines conventional siege tactics with evolved infected capabilities that no civilian community could reasonably prepare for, Hayes reported while highlighting enemy positions on her tactical display. Kane's forces have established overwatch positions on the administration building and library, while infected units are conducting systematic probes of the eastern and southern defensive lines using what appears to be coordinated reconnaissance techniques. Derek studied the tactical situation with professional assessment that quickly identified both immediate threats and potential opportunities for effective intervention. The infected aren't just attacking randomly, they're gathering intelligence about defensive capabilities and response times, then withdrawing to allow Kane's snipers to exploit any weaknesses they've identified, Derek observed while checking his specialized ammunition and confirming communication links with federal support assets. If we can disrupt their coordination protocols while simultaneously neutralizing Kane's overwatch positions, we might be able to break their tactical advantage and give the defenders time to reorganize their positions using the enhanced equipment we're bringing. Wright's voice crackled through their communication system with updates from the command center that revealed additional complications threatening to overwhelm even their enhanced tactical capabilities. Rodriguez, Sullivan, we're detecting electromagnetic signatures consistent with experimental neural interface technology in Kane's possession, which could explain how he's achieved direct control over infected behavior patterns, Wright transmitted with obvious concern about the implications of this technological development. Our intelligence suggests Kane may have access to military-grade equipment that was being developed for infected pacification operations before the collapse, representing capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in post-apocalyptic territorial conflicts. The armored vehicle stopped at their predetermined insertion point, where Marcus could hear Emma's voice continuing to coordinate defensive operations with the calm professionalism that had made her invaluable to their community's survival efforts. Jacob, rotate your team to the science building's second floor and establish crossfire coverage of the main courtyard, but watch for infected units that might be using the underground maintenance tunnels to bypass our perimeter defenses, Emma transmitted while apparently treating wounded defenders under combat conditions. We've confirmed that some of these infected are using tools and coordinated tactics, so treat them as intelligent opponents rather than mindless predators, and don't assume our previous defensive strategies will remain effective against their evolved capabilities. Marcus felt a surge of pride and determination as he listened to his community members adapting to impossible circumstances with courage and ingenuity that demonstrated why Wright's federal coordination efforts had identified their group as worthy of support and integration. Hayes handed him the infected detection scanner along with detailed instructions for its operation, emphasizing that the device could provide early warning about infiltrators while also helping to identify infected individuals who might be coordinating attacks from concealed positions. The technology represented their best hope for neutralizing Kane's most significant tactical advantage while providing his community with capabilities that could ensure their long-term survival against evolving threats. As they moved toward the campus through carefully planned approach routes that avoided both Kane's observation positions and known infected patrol areas, Marcus could see the full extent of the damage that had been inflicted on his home during the hours he had been away learning about threats he never could have imagined. Several buildings showed signs of explosive damage while others had been systematically damaged in ways that suggested deliberate destruction rather than random violence, indicating that Kane's assault was intended not just to capture resources but to eliminate organized resistance that might threaten his expanding territorial control. The personal stakes of the battle became overwhelming as Marcus realized that defeat would mean not just death for his friends and community members, but the elimination of everything they had built together during the darkest period in human history. Derek's military training took over as they approached the outer defensive perimeter, using hand signals and tactical movement techniques that allowed them to avoid detection while positioning themselves for maximum effectiveness against Kane's coordinated assault forces. Marcus, when we engage, remember that the infected units are being directed by Kane's neural interface technology, so disrupting their coordination should cause them to revert to less organized behavior patterns, Derek whispered while preparing his specialized weapons for the upcoming engagement. Focus on identifying and neutralizing any infected individuals who appear to be directing group movements, while I coordinate with federal support assets to eliminate Kane's human snipers and command personnel. The approaching battle would test everything they had learned about evolved infected capabilities while determining whether their community could survive the most sophisticated threat they had ever faced, with the future of organized human resistance hanging in the balance of the next few crucial hours. The assault began with Derek coordinating precision strikes from federal artillery assets that eliminated Kane's sniper positions in devastating explosions that shattered windows across the campus while sending Kane's human fighters scrambling for cover among the rubble of their carefully planned overwatch positions. Marcus moved through the chaos with deadly efficiency, using the infected detection scanner to identify coordinated infected units that were attempting to exploit the confusion caused by the artillery bombardment. The device's readings revealed a disturbing pattern. Multiple infected individuals were maintaining formation despite the explosions, their neural interface connections apparently providing them with tactical coordination that transcended normal survival instincts and allowed them to continue operating as effective military assets even under extreme combat stress. Emma's voice cut through the battle communications with urgent medical updates that revealed the true cost of Kane's assault on their community, but also demonstrated the remarkable resilience and adaptability that had kept them alive through 18 months of post-apocalyptic survival. Derek, Marcus, we have 7 wounded defenders in the medical facility, but Jacob's tactical leadership has maintained our perimeter integrity despite facing coordinated attacks that exceeded anything in our defensive planning, Emma reported while apparently continuing to treat injured community members under combat conditions. The infected units withdrew systematically when the artillery strikes began, suggesting they retain enough self-preservation instinct to recognize superior firepower, but Kane's human fighters are regrouping for what appears to be a final assault on our central defensive positions. Marcus spotted Kane himself emerging from the damaged administration building, carrying what appeared to be a sophisticated electronic device that was undoubtedly the neural interface technology Wright's intelligence had identified as the source of his unprecedented control over infected behavior. Kane moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to tactical superiority, apparently unaware that his technological advantage was about to be neutralized by federal countermeasures that represented years of research into infected neural manipulation and control systems. Derek immediately began coordinating with Wright's command center to deploy electromagnetic pulse weapons that would disrupt Kane's interface technology while simultaneously providing covering fire for Marcus's approach toward the enemy commander. The infected detection scanner suddenly erupted with alarm signals as Marcus realized that Kane had positioned multiple infected infiltrators throughout the campus, individuals who had been maintaining human behavioral patterns while gathering intelligence about defensive positions and capabilities. The revelation that their community had been compromised from within for an unknown period sent rage coursing through Marcus as he understood how Kane had achieved such detailed tactical knowledge of their strengths and weaknesses. Using the scanner's directional capabilities, Marcus began systematically identifying and neutralizing these infiltrators with the specialized ammunition that disrupted their neural coordination and caused them to revert to mindless wandering that eliminated their intelligence-gathering capabilities. Hayes's voice crackled through their communication system with updates that revealed the broader strategic significance of their desperate battle for survival against Kane's sophisticated assault forces. Marcus, Federal Command has confirmed that Kane's neural interface technology represents stolen military research that could potentially be reverse-engineered to provide similar capabilities to other survivor communities, Hayes transmitted while coordinating additional support assets. Your community's successful defense against this level of technological advantage would demonstrate that civilian survivors can adapt and overcome even the most sophisticated threats, providing crucial intelligence for protecting other settlements against similar attacks and establishing protocols for broader resistance coordination. Derek's military precision proved decisive as he systematically eliminated Kane's remaining human fighters while coordinating with federal drone assets to provide real-time intelligence about infected unit movements and concentrations. The specialized ammunition proved devastatingly effective against the neural-enhanced infected, causing immediate disruption of their coordination protocols and reverting them to the disorganized behavior patterns that survivor communities had learned to combat effectively. Kane's tactical advantage evaporated as his controlled infected assets became liability rather than strategic advantage, forcing him into direct confrontation with opponents who possessed superior equipment and coordination capabilities. The final confrontation occurred in the campus courtyard as Kane attempted to retreat with his neural interface device, apparently hoping to preserve his technological advantage for future operations against other survivor communities. Marcus intercepted him using tactical movement techniques Derek had taught him, while the infected detection scanner revealed that Kane himself had been partially infected, explaining his ability to interface with the neural control technology while maintaining apparent human consciousness and strategic thinking. The discovery that infection could potentially enhance rather than destroy human capabilities represented a terrifying new dimension of the evolved threat that would require completely revised approaches to identification and containment protocols. Kane's defeat marked more than just tactical victory for Marcus's community, it represented proof that organized human resistance could adapt and overcome even the most sophisticated combinations of evolved infected capabilities and human ruthlessness. Wright's voice confirmed through their communication system that federal observers had documented the entire engagement, providing crucial intelligence about effective countermeasures and tactical approaches that would be shared with other survivor communities facing similar threats. The successful integration of federal support assets with civilian defensive capabilities demonstrated the potential for coordinated resistance efforts that could tip the balance in humanity's favor against the evolving infected threat. As the sun set over the damaged but surviving college campus, Marcus looked around at his community members who had endured and overcome challenges that would have destroyed less organized and determined groups of survivors. Emma continued treating the wounded with professional competence while Jacob organized cleanup and security operations that would restore their defensive capabilities within hours rather than days. The federal support they had received would continue, providing access to advanced detection technology, communication capabilities, and coordination with other resistance communities that could transform isolated survivor settlements into an integrated network capable of coordinating strategic operations against both infected and human threats. The future remained uncertain and dangerous, with evolved infected capabilities continuing to develop and other human predators like Kane threatening organized communities across the continent. However, the successful defense of the college campus had proven that cooperation between federal resources and civilian determination could prevail against seemingly overwhelming odds, providing hope that humanity might not only survive the apocalyptic collapse but eventually reclaim civilization through coordinated resistance efforts that combined military capabilities with the resilience and adaptability that had kept survivor communities alive through the darkest period in human history.